You've tried to avoid it on social media, but you can't stop hearing about the resurfacing of some beloved characters returning to the fight in New York City. I'm not talking about West Side Story, folks.
I feel pretty, oh so pretty.
I'm referring to the pop culture juggernaut that is Spider-Man No Way Home.
Welcome to Three Films and a Podcast, the show where destiny brought together three friends to enhance each other's cinematic journey by watching three new movies in a series of themed rounds. There is no claim of ownership on any film footage used in this episode, as all film footage is owned in its entirety by the copyright holders. And just like every car in Too Fast, Too Furious, this podcast contains spoilers. Enjoy!
So welcome back to Three Films and a Little Podcast, a spin-off of our regular show where we step out of our normal structure for a little while. My name is Matt Weiler, coming to you from the city of Trees, Utah, and I am joined as always by Tyler Beck in another dimension.
In probably a city of trees. Do you know how many city of trees there are? It's just it's just so funny you say that, because I've noticed that traveling around. Like, you'll be like, I remember like Tulsa, Oklahoma is the city of trees. I remember that from being there. But I'm in Beaumont, Texas, which
can't be right. I'm pretty sure I live in the city of trees, and I'm pretty sure I would know.
Here's
Tyler,
the thing:
so.
I believe you because there's so many of them.
Well, you could say that there's a multiverse of them.
Hey, there it is.
I might say that.
And we're also joined by Ben Lawhorn up in Salt Lake City.
Hello. You guys continually saying City of Trees, and seeing Ethan on here is like, oh, this is for La La Land 2. Like, it's the next, like, City of Trees. Like, it's gonna be the next big song comes out.
Ethan lives in a forest. Like, how is Portland not the city of trees? You know what I mean?
True.
This is true. Yeah, if anybody has a good argument,
everyone knows
me.
it's Pleasant Grove.
Well,
Matt said it first, so kind of got dibs on it, you know?
This whole podcast exists to bring together a movie club community where we can all watch and enjoy new movies and, above all, discuss them. So check us out across social media at 3filmspod. You can find all merch, Patreon, and other needs at 3filmspod.com. Check us out there. Today, we welcome back a familiar face who has already joined us a number of times. You can go back and revisit his Clubhouse answers, but more importantly, you can check out 15 Minutes of Marvel to hear him cover all things MCU, including a ton of what we're chatting about today. Welcome back, Ethan.
What is up, Matt? Thanks for having me, boys. I'm glad to travel through the multiverse and land on a planet with all of us in store. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be a good time.
Our Ant-Man.
Remind us, Ethan, where everybody can find you.
Yeah, I'm at 15 Minute Marvel on Twitter, and 15 Minutes of Marvel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you can get a podcast. New episodes drop every Wednesday and Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. We're going into a little bit of an MCU dry season right now, so going to be covering a lot of news, might be doing some old reviews, yet to be seen. If you want anything in particular covered, hit me up on Twitter. I'm game to talk anything Marvel.
Nice.
Let's do Daredevil.
Awesome.
We were talking about it before the show, but I'm also running through that for the first time. And so if I could advocate for anything, I would like to chat more Daredevil, because, you know, I'm way behind the times here. So
let's do it, man. Let's finish it together, and we'll go.
I still need to tackle season 3 there, so I'm on board with that as well.
That's true. I have not watched season 3. I've only done 1 and 2.
Wrap
we can
it up.
all do that together. That'd be so fun.
Bang.
Good.
Let's do it live. Okay.
We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. Fuck it.
Nice.
We'll do it live. So I have to dial this back a little bit and be a little bit frank with everyone, with our listeners. The fans of the show, our listeners, our audience, they've been complaining a little bit about our little pods, saying that they're a little bit too little. We don't go big enough. We try to be fun. We try to do recasts. We try to do drafts. We try to cover watch party movies. Like, we try to give people what they want. They wanted something big.
We're trying so hard.
Yeah, we're trying. We meet for hours on what can we do for this little pod.
That poor intern, all the notes he's taking.
It's absurd.
So
feel bad
we didn't want all that hard work that we put into this to go to waste. So we decided, you know what, let's take the kitchen sink. Let's throw the kitchen sink at it, and let's figure out what we could do. And we decided to do maybe our biggest little pod to date, just with the just for the sheer magnitude of what the topic we're covering. And that is the pop culture juggernaut that is Spider-Man No Way Home. We'll get into why this movie is a big deal. Right now, it is just absolutely killing the box office in ways that we haven't seen since. I'm not even going to finish that sentence because
who knows?
It doesn't matter.
So in ways that make me feel so dumb. I went on Ethan's pod for a special patron episode. And one of the questions you asked me was like, will this movie reach $1 billion?
Yeah, I remember
and in
that.
my ignorance, I was like, no. Because to me, and I explained this, but I don't like follow box office news. Like, I don't know what movies do. I just know like $1 billion is such an astronomically large number. I was like, that's just too much money. And it's what doubled that, like more than doubled that by now.
I think it's number 10 all time grossing right now, something like that. Or it's on its way up. It's like 12 right now on Wikipedia, but it's working its way up. Kind of nuts.
I remember you having you on the pod, Tyler, and I remember asking you that question because that's like a question I struggled with myself, where I'm just like, there's no way. Like, there's just no way. No way it's going to make $1 billion. First movie to make $1 billion since Star Wars The Force Awakens, which is just like bananas, because that's a reboot of a major franchise that like people didn't have Star Wars for like whatever 8 years or something crazy. Like, it's the numbers that this is doing is bananas, and box office wise, Marvel news came out today. Marvel made up for 30% of box office dollars in 2021. Wow, that is wild.
And this is a pandemic.
We're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Dude,
people
my
wanted
theater was jam packed.
Yep.
I would say that's like, honestly, for me, one of the more like why this one hit so much harder than any others is because like the box office has kind of sucked the whole time, understandably. And then now it's just like, cool, we have like the second highest grossing Marvel movie ever and something that's going to end up in the top 10 all time. It's like, it's crazy.
Matt and I were talking real quick before we went on, started recording, and that Spider-Man like today, which is like a Tuesday, January 4th, like it came out like 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago almost. It made almost $7 million today. The Last Duel by Ridley Scott, featuring the first time Ben Affleck and Matt Damon got together to write a screenplay since Good Will Hunting, made like $2 million at the box office fucking total. Excuse me, but like that it boggles my mind what we're doing with Spider-Man No Way Home.
I mean, we went and saw Last Duel. I don't know.
I saw The Last Duel. I thought it was pretty good, but it's not a box office hit.
As we'll talk about, there's a big lack of Andrew Garfield in The Last Duel, so I think that's really what hurt its box office.
Too little.
There's your big problem.
There is. Well, I think a big reason to this movie's success is that Spider-Man, I mean, he's just a character that means a lot to very many people. He spans generations. He came out in the 60s, so like our dads, were around for like the birth of Spider-Man, the beginnings of Spider-Man, and it spanned and stayed relevant, across. And now we have kids. Like my little 3-year-old girl is watching, a little kid Spidey TV show now. So it's like this character has spanned, the generations. And so I guess for this movie, for Spider-Man No Way Home, my question for you guys is, how did your fandom come to be of Spider-Man? Like, what's your Spider-Man journey, and how do you feel like that influenced the way that you consumed this movie? And let's kick it off with you, Ethan.
I think that's a big question, because I am quite the Spider-Man obsessive. My daughter also watches that Spidey and Friends show, and like we're always talking about Spider-Man. Like he's the token hero. When we talk about heroes and bad guys, like in our house, that Spider-Man's the guy. I mean, look, Raimi Spider-Man came out when I was 8 years old, so that was a big deal for me. That is like premium Spider-Man age, where you're just like so invested. And I remember watching Spider-Man 2 at home. I had a little brother, have a little brother. We watched it together, just thinking like, this is the craziest, coolest thing. That was like my first comic book movie that I ever saw. And I wasn't like even into movies, right? I didn't really get into movies on the level I'm at until just a few years ago. But deep down, having that memory of watching the Sam Raimi trilogy for the first time, like growing up, being totally fluent in like Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin and everything that and Tobey Maguire, like that shaped what I thought of Spider-Man and who he was as a hero, and Peter Parker and all of these things surrounding it. And then the MCU taking Tom Holland and now, you know, involved with Infinity War and Endgame and Homecoming and this trilogy, that really like roped me back in because we got such a unique storytelling when it comes to these three movies, very different from any other storytelling in the MCU. And I think realizing how much of a human being Peter Parker is compared to a Tony Stark. Like, I'm not a billionaire. I'm not a playboy. I'm not a philanthropist. Like, I can't relate to that. Peter Parker, I was a high schooler at one time, right? I was into photography at one time. So, like, I get it. And Peter Parker can relate. And I think that's personally for me, like, why I relate so much to Spider-Man, because he's just like an average dude who has this responsibility and we're constantly figuring out what he can handle and what he can't. So, like, shout out Sam Raimi. Super stoked to see him back in the MCU for Multiverse of Madness. Like, my childhood dreams are just coming alive. It's wild.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talked about how, you know, Spider-Man came about in the 60s and how your main introduction to Spider-Man was through the Raimi movies, because, you know, we were talking about before the podcast, I never read comics, but I liked comic book stuff. I was more of a DC guy. Like, I was just more of a Batman kid. And like, you know, I leaned more towards like Ninja Turtles and G.I. Joes and like those sorts of things. But Spider-Man was always on my radar, but it was those Raimi movies that was like really drove Spider-Man, you know, into my heart, my pop culture heart, I guess you could say. Because it was just, I mean, I remember what that felt like. I was like, oh shit, these are starting to look real. You know, like Batman always had sort of like a realism to it, like the Burton Batmans, you know?
Yeah.
But they weren't like the CGI wasn't quite there yet, and the technology wasn't quite there yet. So like the action was cool, but like sort of limited in scope. You know what I mean? Like those stories felt more grounded and realistic, even though they're a comic book. But like, even though they're a comic book story, but like the Spider-Man movies were the first times it was like, oh, it's all starting to come together. Like we can actually see like the comic book on screen and moving. And to me, that was just big for me. There's something I noticed in the moment. I was a little bit older than you, Ethan, but like, you know, my experience with it was just being like the Spider-Man cartoons and like, oh yeah, Spider-Man's cool. He was like in the top 3 for me. It was like Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. Those were like the 3 guys.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we've talked about it before on this podcast, and I'm sure you've talked about it, Ethan, but all the rights issues and everything, Spider-Man sort of got like tossed off to the side. And now it's like, you know, kids are looking towards Iron Man and, you know, Captain America and somewhat Batman as like the big 3, right? And then now it's cool to see that it's like flipping back towards Spider-Man. But yeah, I think those Raimi Spider-Mans were huge. And I think all the MCU stuff, I think your podcast, Ethan, owes a lot to Sam Raimi and what he did with those Spider-Man movies. Because again, to me, that was the first well-executed comic book movie that really felt like a comic book movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it felt like a comic book movie that was giving it the respect it deserved, maybe, because I do think, I mean, the Burton Batmans aside, but like the next 2 Batman that we kind of got to see in theater, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, definitely embrace like the crazy comic book side. It's like really bright colors. This guy is blue because he's Mr. Freeze, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then we get this.
We'll not hear slander on the Riddler.
I listen, I kept it out of my mouth. Don't worry. I'm not shitting on that movie at all. But it's like, I don't remember what I was talking about now, but these ones, I guess, felt more realistic. I think we had just gotten the first X-Men movie the year before, and that was cool, but that almost like was a very adult comic book movie where it's like, we're not doing the blue and yellow. Everyone's gonna be in black leather and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Still really cool. I still think X2 is got to be up there, the best superhero movies of all time. But this Spider-Man one, I'm with you, Tyler. Like, that's when it kind of felt like, oh, this is kind of realistic. This is really interesting to see what this is like for me, my history of Spider-Man, I'll try to keep it brief. I brought it up on here, but growing up as a kid, rented a book at the library on comic book characters, and I opened it up, and the first one on there was Peter Parker. I was like, cool, this is my favorite superhero now. Spider-Man, got it. Like, this is great. Like, I'm locked in. Like, and I didn't really talk to anyone else who did comic books, so I didn't have like an idea of like, yeah, they're going to put the most popular person on the front page. You know, I was just like, oh, I found out about this guy called Spider-Man. I don't know if you guys know about him, whatever.
Ever heard
but he's
of
just like kind of been my dude ever since then. And then as I've gotten older, I realized like, oh, he's like a lot of people's dude, which is great. Because to Ethan's point, like, he's arguably the most relatable comic book hero out there. Like, everyone has gone through high school, so you can relate to being in school or even in middle school. Where it's just like, you don't feel like yourself, or, you know, you're keeping a secret, that kind of thing. So everyone can relate to it. Those would be the comics that I would always kind of go towards. I'm a really basic person. He's got a lot of great villains, but I just love seeing him and Venom go at it. That's my dude. I think it's also kind of why Spider-Man 3 hurt my feelings so much, because like, this guy deserves his own 2 movie arc with Spider-Man. This is like, I love Venom so much, but
I did think that was weird in the moment, and this is before I even thought about this kind of stuff or like decisions like this. But I was like, I thought Venom was a big deal, and in Spider-Man 3, like, it's kind of like, I don't remember it being that big of a deal. Do you know what I mean? Like, because that was the same movie that had like Sandman and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's like Sony forced Venom in there because he was so popular.
Yeah, studio overreach.
Like,
for sure.
Raimi didn't want him in there at all.
Oh, okay.
Because there were plans for Spider-Man 4, and Spider-Man 4 was going to be something on a big scale like this, and he wanted Venom to have his own singular movie. So yeah, I'm very curious to all of your points of like, what would comic book films be today if we never got Sam Raimi's trilogy in the early aughts? Like, you talk about 2002 and giving it respect and being a serious movie. We don't get anything, you know, Spider-Man 2 is one of the greatest comic book movies of all time. There's no debate about that. Spider-Man 3 falls off, obviously, but you have to wait until 2008 until you get something like that with Batman, right? With Christopher Nolan. If you don't get this with Sam Raimi, if Sam Raimi doesn't step up and do this with Spider-Man, I don't think we ever get Dark Knight. I don't think Warner Bros. Says, Christopher Nolan, come make a Batman trilogy, or like write Batman Begins and things like that. I just don't think it goes in that direction. And it's so curious, you know, thinking, is there's a multiverse out there somewhere where we don't get the Raimi trilogy? I couldn't fathom what comic book movies would be today without that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing that was exciting for me is I have a similar experience to a sort of a combination of everyone's story here. So in the 90s, obviously there was the Marvel cartoons on Fox that exposed, you know, an entire generation to all these characters. Whether you watched them religiously or not, you were aware of them. Mm-hmm. And there was also, during that time, some trading cards, not unlike Pokemon cards, called Overpower cards. And Overpower cards were Marvel and DC, and there was a game attached to it. And anyways, my brother collected them with his buddies. I think he was in 5th or 6th grade. And I got into those, got to know all the characters, and that sort of was our foray into the comic books earlier on. We were big fans of the Clone Saga, which is a very hot button issue in the Spider-Man community. Very polarizing. Many fans of the Clone Saga, many not fans of the Clone Saga.
I've never even heard of it.
But we were groomed for multiple Spider-Mans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that where the
90s.
pointing meme came from?
I mean, that actually is somewhat related. So Spider-Man to me was always, you know, number one. I was aware that like Superman and Batman were maybe like the global number one superheroes, but in the Marvel sphere, Spider-Man was the guy. And I feel like he was just sort of like universally beloved for Marvel superheroes. And like Iron Man had like sort of a crappy cartoon TV show. Wasn't that cool of a guy like it during that time. And it was amazing to see what the MCU did with Iron Man and Captain America, because, you know, for the next 10 or the last 15 years, they've been the guys, you know, they've been the coolest characters. But what's been fun for me about this new movie, because we've had Spider-Man movies, we had the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, we had, the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, and we even had, Spider-Man enter the MCU. But it wasn't until this last movie that I felt the pendulum start to swing back in Spider-Man's direction. We've been seeing Iron Man and Cap for the last 10 years, and it kind of feels like Spider-Man's, we'll see where it goes from here, but it feels like he's positioning himself right atop the throne again in the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think it's pretty unbelievable what they were able to do with Iron Man and Captain America. Like, I just went through the whole MCU run not too long ago, within the last year. And like, Captain America is so much cooler than it has any right to be. You know what I mean? Like, I fucking love Captain America. Like, I love like the corny patriotism of it. Like I love Steve Rogers, like pesky optimism, like that eternal optimism. Yeah. The I can do this all day thing. Like, I just love it.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
I remember when Iron Man came out, a friend of the pod, Adam Palcher, was like, yeah, they're going to have RDJ play Iron Man. And this was back when, like, I don't know, man, I thought I knew stuff about movies, but I didn't know shit, apparently, because I was just like, I didn't see it. I was like, Robert Downey Jr., like, I didn't know anything about him, really. I just knew he was, like, this, like, kind of tabloid playboy guy, which, if I had known anything about Tony Stark, makes total sense. But I was like, that guy can't be a superhero. I don't know. I just didn't get it. And, like, I couldn't have been possibly more wrong. And there's, like, the fact that they were able to take these two characters who, granted, I have, like, this is just my own personal experience. Like, I couldn't have cared less about either of them.
Yeah.
But I went and saw the first Iron Man and the first Captain America in theaters, and I loved both of them. And it's just incredible. It's a real testament to like what these guys are able to do, and women, these people, I should say. When I say guys, I mean people, because I'm apparently a sexist.
The royal guys, the
royal guys.
Everyone.
But I don't know. Just like, I think about it all the time. Just like, I can't believe they did this. Because growing up, it was Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man for me personally, and like that's just all you heard. It was like the only Marvel characters anyone cared about were the X-Men and Spider-Man, and like the X-Men just sort of felt like their own thing. It didn't feel like a Marvel thing that was, or like it didn't feel like a superhero thing that was supposed to be a rival to like Batman or Superman, right? I don't know. I don't really know what I'm trying to say here. It's just like, I just think about it so much. I can't believe they did it. And I think you're right. It isn't until now, like they had to literally kill off Iron Man and essentially kill off Captain America for like Spider-Man to finally like take what I believe as his rightful place at like the top of the order there.
Yeah.
And, I'm happy to see it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think, a lot of people probably know the history behind it, but essentially Marvel was facing bankruptcy, sold off Spider-Man, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Hulk just to like stay afloat. And I think about with what they were left over, and it makes me think of that Obadiah Stane line from Iron Man 1. It was like,
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
It's like Jon Favreau built this in a cave. Like he like made the MCU like with like fucking Iron Man, which honestly, like it's probably hard for people who don't like know comics or like, but he wasn't like a person, you know what I mean? Like it was not like the number one draw. And now, I mean, RDJ is like one of the richest actors.
A few tiers down even.
Yeah. So like when they were starting out with that, then like to make him the center, it's like, oh, that was not like expected at all. Like they had tried a Hulk movie before too with Eric Bana. That's a real comic book movie, by the way. That's a real comic book movie. Yeah, it's just amazing what they were able to pull off. It sounds like maybe silly for people who are listening. It's like 11 years later and the MCU owns like 5 of the top 10 grossing movies of all time, but it's like, if you really think about it though, back in 2008, like it was just kind of nuts that Favreau, like the Swingers guy, is going to make a Marvel movie with the guy who's right now most known for being arrested and just did Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with Val Kilmer. It's like, all right, yeah, this is going to make billions of dollars, but
he just did Kiss Kiss Bang Bang with the worst Batman.
Yeah, exactly.
This guy's going to be in a comic book movie.
And at the time, I don't think, obviously the expectations weren't there, but I've talked about it before. That's that first stinger from Iron Man with Nick Fury, it's just like, okay, maybe they've got something coming up. Like that's to this day still one of the best stingers of all time. It was so good.
For sure.
Yeah.
If we've spoiled anything up to this point, sorry, but try to forget that we did. If we did,
do you live under? Like by the time this episode comes out,
but let's say we did. Let's say we did. Or no,
we're sorry.
Let's pretend we didn't.
Sorry.
Let's pretend we didn't. We didn't spoil anything.
Okay, cool.
And we're not going to spoil anything right now for this section. But this is your last. If you've come this far, you haven't seen this movie. This is your last safe segment. And essentially, the question is, if you were to prep someone to see this movie, and they are limited, well, let's say they're not limited. What would you recommend they consume before going to see this movie, Ethan?
That's geez. Well, gosh. Okay, so this movie it's a lot. It's a lot, right? It's all encompassing. It's 20 years of Spider-Man. Okay, so yeah, without directly identifying spoilers, obviously, I think it's imperative that you watch Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home leading into Spider-Man No Way Home. I think if you're going to watch anything, I think that's where you start. That is full MCU canon. That tells you everything you need to know about Tom Holland, Peter Parker, and Vulture, and Mysterio, and fake news, and everything leading into No Way Home that directly impacts the film. So I think that is really key and really important, because if you don't watch these two movies, you can still watch No Way Home. Absolutely. It's a really fun Spider-Man movie. There's no question about that. You're going to miss out on some really key, dramatic, and emotional moments that really hit home because of what you've seen in the other two movies. With that being said, outside of the MCU, I think it's important to watch Spider-Man 2 from the Sam Raimi trilogy and Amazing Spider-Man 2 from the Mark Webb verse. And I think those are the two movies that hold the greatest amount of weight and power in this film outside of the direct MCU. There are direct references, there are direct callbacks, there are very key character developments that relate to those films. So if you've got time, those are the four that you need to watch going into this. And I think all of those will essentially cover your bases and make sure that you don't really miss out on any key emotional moments in this film.
I do think you could skip Far From Home because the villain's kind of dumb. Not really a great villain in that movie. This is slander. This is absurd. I won't stand for this. I will log off right this second.
Speaking of villains, real quick, the trailers reveal to us that villains from these other Spider-Man movies, just to give some context on why we might be recommending some of these other Spider-Man movies. Yeah, the villains are in the trailers. And so if you want some backstory to where these guys came from and understand maybe more completely their story arc for this movie, that's why we would maybe take a step back and say, hey, check these movies out.
Well, and not only that, like the Raimi and the Webb Spider-Man movies are origin stories. Like especially the first ones, but those runs are like Spider-Man origins. And in the MCU, we don't actually get a Spider-Man origin, which I don't know if I'm alone here, but I loved it. Like that was my biggest gripe with the Webb movies. I'm like, we fucking know how he became a Spider-Man. Like, let's see something different. Like, we don't need to reboot the origin story. So I've always been a huge fan of that. We came in with MCU Spider-Man after all that. So I think what Ethan said is spot on. I would just pick one of the Webb movies, maybe watch the second one. I would say watch the second one because you know the origin story. You can watch all three, the first two Raimis because they're great. Pick maybe the second one. I don't know. If you're pressed for time, then maybe I don't know what you're doing watching all these movies in the first place. But yeah, just go watch a couple of those ones just so you have some context about Spider-Man, some of the context for the villains, and then go watch No Way Home or not Far From Home. I mean, go just so you can, because No Way Home picks up right where that leaves off. So
Yeah.
Those make the most sense to me if you're pressed for time. If you're not, go watch all of them because they're great. It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
I think Amazing Spider-Man wise, I think number 2 is the worst movie, but I do think it's really critical to seeing No Way Home because you get a very wholesome moment that is a direct relation to a major storyline in that universe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think,
and all the Electro stuff and
and a lot of character things. And I think if you don't watch that number 2 movie, you miss out on that, and you miss a couple really big beats. So I think that's important, even though Goblin is just atrocious in that film.
This is like, it's a really good question, but it's also hard because like I just want to say all of them. Like I can make an argument for every single movie.
Yeah.
But I do think the core of all these movies you can find in the second entries of every Spider-Man. Like it's already been said.
Totally
Spider-Man
agree.
2, Amazing Spider-Man 2, Far From Home. If you watch those 3, No Way Home is like, you're not going to miss much. Far From Home kind of recapped, Endgame, that kind of stuff. So you still get some of that previous background with Peter Parker, which is good, from Homecoming. All the story beats for like from Amazing Spider-Man 2. I don't know. It's all been said. So I would just say the second one from each of the Spider-Man series.
I don't have anything really to add other than this movie literally takes place. It's a fire starter taking place directly after Far From Home.
Mm-hmm.
So Far From Home, if you've seen Far From Home, it ends with Mysterio on the Jumbotron, basically, letting the cat out of the bag. And this movie takes place literally seconds right after that.
That's right, folks. Spider-Man is in fact Peter Parker.
Are you Spider-Man's girlfriend?
Is in fact.
In fact, it might even take place seconds before that.
Can I say something really fast? Because my
move on.
My next topic, go. So my brother brought this up to me when we saw it the first time. You talk about Infinity War and Endgame. Yes, Endgame. Infinity War and Endgame, and then No Way Home. Those are the 3 Marvel films that start with audio layovers when you are watching the kind of like the fanfare in the very beginning. And those, when you're getting an audio layover of fanfare, that shit is going to slap because that they're prepping you for a massive opening scene and opening credit. And that's exactly the case with No Way Home, as is with Infinity War and Endgame. And I think that is something that's done really well. And you mentioned like it takes place seconds later. I mean, it directly like loops in. You get to hear the repeat of the very last thing we hear in Far From Home. Huge win for the movie.
I loved it.
Also, that last part from Far From Home would have been better with Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Don't even start with
Let's
me.
move on to our next topic.
Yeah, so this movie, we're past the point of no return with spoilers. If you've come this far, you've seen the movie, or you just don't care, which is unfortunate. In fact, maybe just stop watching if you don't care. Like, just don't watch. No, we have a segment called the elevator pitch, which is essentially what scene do you show someone to buy them completely into this movie. I know that with this movie Breaking Records, there's not a whole lot of scenes that would be wrong to show. I'm sure you'd get immediate buy-in just with the character, but let's pretend you don't. What scene are you showing?
So I'm going to go first just because I honestly can't think of an answer. I mean, I can and I will, but like the episode we just released this week, I forget the guest names we talked about last night.
Kevin and Aaron.
Yeah, Kevin and Aaron. We asked her this question and she's like, why am I convincing them to watch this movie? And that's kind of how I feel about this, because it's like, I don't know, man. Like
that's the point of this exercise.
I know. That's my response to Aaron in the moment, but I'm just like, it's like, you need me to convince you to watch the biggest movie of the year? Like, I don't know.
I appreciate what you're saying, but it's funny that you guys are coming from different perspectives, because yours is more like, why wouldn't you want to watch this? And hers is like, why would you want to watch this? Like, don't watch Last Night in Soho. Yeah. It was like, why would I try to convince someone? It's like the polar opposites that you guys are approaching this from.
I think I would go with the Doc Ock fight on the freeway. Just because, you know, you get that you can see that it ties in the previous Spider-Man. You know, we're bringing back Molina, and you get the
hello, Peter.
Each of them have their own different appendages fighting each other. Got Iron Spider versus cool Doc
scene.
Ock. I don't know. I thought I sure, why not? You could throw a dart at any scene in this movie, and you'd be right. But
I think
maybe put it in the trailer.
I think Marvel Studios agreed with you because that's all that we saw in every single trailer. So,
and I just I don't like picking spoilery scenes for this exercise. So that's the least spoilery. And yeah, that's I saw your guys' answers and they're full spoilers. So I'm like, I don't know. I'll go.
We're
first.
going all in.
Yeah. And you're not wrong. But for me, if I'm going to try to convince someone, because look, we didn't talk about this because we've already done the Clubhouse segment. No Way Home is my new, if I could see any movie again for the first time, what would I do? I don't remember the only other time in my life I can remember having such a visceral experience watching a movie is the first time I saw Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings. But this movie, like, there was times where I was like just looking around at the crowd and I just like, my smile was like ear to ear. I was like, this is fucking incredible. This is like why we go to the movies.
Why we go to movies.
Like this right here. This is why we go on opening night. This is why we have a podcast. This is why we all care so much. It was just, I just know I'll never forget that. And I just like my own personal reactions and then witnessing everyone else's reactions. Like it was just beautiful. It was incredible. And so like, I wouldn't want to take away any of those moments from anyone. And it's okay that you guys are going to do that. But me personally, I have a heart and I can't take those moments
Thank
from
you,
someone.
Tyler. How's the weather up there, Tyler?
It's pretty nice. It's nice up here on my high horse.
The view's nice from up there.
Yeah. The saddle's nice and comfy on my high horse. But I don't know, man. I just that's just
you're totally right. I respect that every time we do the elevator pitch. That's how you view it. It's like, I mean, you wouldn't want to be too spoilery. Looking back on all the trailers now, it's like, that's everything that they could show basically, is up until the spoilery stuff, which for the record, I'm glad they didn't spoil in the trailers because I feel like a lesser movie would have done that. But obviously this one didn't need it. To go along with your crowd reaction stuff, that kind of leads into my pick, which is the first time that we see Andrew Garfield. And Matt may remember this, but we were in the theater together. Like the portal opens up and someone in the audience yells, "No fucking way." It's like, as he's walking through.
That's iconic.
It was so good.
That's
like
awesome.
a similar thing to when Toby comes through. It's like normally we've talked on here, like when I saw Baby Driver and then people are like Subaru Sony's like, oh, it's so annoying. But this felt like one of those like,
oh dude,
we're all here. This is like a crowd movie. Like you can't tell people to
there
not
are
yell,
entire lines of dialogue that I still don't know what they said because the crowd was just
people are cheering.
When
it's true.
When Toby came through, there was a dude sitting behind me who I think it's the happiest this guy's ever been in his life.
I mean,
he was by himself. I turned to look at him because I was like, I love this guy. I got to see what this guy looks like. But he was just like, it's similar. He's like, let's fucking go. Let's fucking go. He's just like screaming it over and over. And I was like, I just love that this guy's so happy. I love it so much. I don't know. It's just beautiful.
It was so good. I had tears in my eyes that whole scene, like seeing Toby come through. It's like, oh my God. But for me, it's the in between before Toby comes in, because it to me is like one of the funniest scenes in the movie. And Andrew Garfield comes through the portal, and Ned and MJ are there. And they're just like, who are like making him prove himself. And so he like jumps up and attaches to the ceiling, just hanging there. And she's still just like, I want you to crawl across. And he's like, are you kidding me? Like nobody else can do this. Like, what are you, So then he does it. And Ned's mom's like, we get that spot. There's like, that was perfect for me because he was, I mean, I'm surprised I haven't brought it up yet, but Andrew Garfield for me is the perfect Spider-Man. Toby was like the best Peter Parker, and I think Tom Holland is really the best overall mix of them both. But I just love like this smart ass, like wisecracking Spider-Man, and we got so much of that through Garfield. And this scene just like let us know right away that we were getting the same Spider-Man from the web series in this movie. And that just made me so happy that they weren't trying to change the character, how they interacted. Everyone was still true to themselves. And I love that scene so much.
Yeah, I think for me, I was gonna go a little deeper. I'm definitely going full send, so I'm just going full spoilers ahead. Just FYI.
Let's go.
So I was initially, I had it written down on the notes that the initial conversation with all three Spider-Man, basically, we see Tobey and Andrew come through the portals, and then we see them meet Tom Holland on the roof of his high school, right? Mm-hmm. And this is when Tom Holland, right after Aunt May dies at the hand of Green Goblin. J. Jonah Jameson is up on the big screen, and Tom Holland's going through a real crisis in this moment. What I think is so incredible about this scene, and again, I don't know if it necessarily works really well as an elevator pitch, and that's why I'm not really directly choosing it, but what is so intriguing to me, Ben, you mentioned like they stick to their Spider-Man, and Tom Holland tells Andrew face to face, you don't know what I'm going through, so don't say you do. And Andrew just says, okay, you're right, I don't know. And he talks about how when MJ died, how he got dark. He tried to get out of it, but he got dark. He alludes to possibly even killing somebody. I think that scene is one of the darkest, deepest, most emotional, like emotionally jarring moments in the MCU for another specific reason as well. But like Peter Parker talks about the multiverse for many movies in a row and says like, oh my God, the multiverse is real. I can't believe this is confirmed. Holy cow, blah, 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 blah. He's seeing other Spider-Men from other universes and he doesn't fucking care. He doesn't do anything. He's immune to the fact that a multiverse is happening right in front of him. So long story long, that scene is incredibly layered and emotional. I think my elevator pitch scene though is going to be all three of them on the scaffolding basically waiting for the villains. When you get Tobey Maguire talking to Andrew about his back and Andrew cracks it for him and they say, Tobey tells him, you are amazing. You're amazing. Don't let that self-doubt creep in. And it's so nuanced. It feels so natural for them to all talk and to all be involved. And they're just like three Spider-Men just kind of like shooting the shit with each other and having a really good time. That's the one scene for me where it's like, that is so funny. It's so epic. It's hilarious. It's kind of everything that this movie involves is caught up in this very specific scene. That's the elevator pitch scene for me. It's so good.
And I know you've talked about it on your podcast, and Ben, I think you mentioned it on that podcast I'm thinking of, but like possibly the best joke in the MCU, the Peter 3.
Peter 3.
Like, just the meta acknowledgement of the order of Spider-Man within like
the delivery of it.
And just like that line is just incredible. Whoever wrote that, like kudos. That's just so
like
good.
And subscribe.
And like that's almost just like you could almost convince me that was Garfield just ad-libbing. He's like,
oh yeah,
he's like, 100%. I get it, man. I like, fuck, I'm still Spider-Man, but I get it. Like I'm the third one. Like I get it, but it's so good. I don't know. I just loved it so much.
The movie's so meta in and of itself too, because like right after that, when they kind of like take a debrief and they're like, "Okay, we got to work together. We got to figure this out." And Tom Holland's like, not to brag, but I've been part of the Avengers. And Tobey's like,
oh God.
Great. What is that? Like, what are the Avengers? Who are the Avengers? Like, it's funny in the moment because he really doesn't know. It's also hysterical because Sony doesn't have the Avengers. They don't have anything like that.
Right.
And so for people coming in and just seeing No Way Home without seeing Infinity War or Endgame or anything else prior, they're in the same boat. They're like, it doesn't matter to me. It's very, and so I think the script as a whole is so nuanced like that. It's so well done.
Do you think there's anyone in the world that's a Spider-Man fan that didn't watch the Avengers and like the rest of the MCU? I know what you're saying, Ethan. I get it. Conceptually, I understand, but like there's that person doesn't exist, right?
I think when you talk about these box office dollars, the only way it's raking in these box office dollars is by getting massive amounts of people to go see it. So if you're going with your parents or your parents decide to go, or even people older than that just might not have ever done that, but they haven't been to a movie all year long and they feel safe enough to finally go to one at the end of the year and they choose Spider-Man because that's what they can mutually agree upon. I think it reaches all audiences, and that's something that they really did take into account. Whether or not they actually took it into account, it kind of proves like the wide net that they're casting. Nobody except people who have seen Daredevil on Netflix know who Matt Murdock is. But those people who do know who Matt Murdock is, it's huge 45 seconds.
It's so funny you say that. That's actually anecdotally for myself, not true. So I went with my brother-in-law. And he, when Murdock shows up on screen, I leaned over and I was like, that's Daredevil. Because I knew he's like my nephew, you know, is his son. And he loves all this stuff. Like, you know, he's young. So like, I thought I was going to be able to go to this movie with him. But my brother-in-law's like, if Spider-Man's not in costume, swinging on screen, like, we're just going to be answering questions. So anyways, he didn't go, but I went with his dad. And he was like, he was able to deduce that it was Daredevil. He's like, oh, it was, I saw a blind white guy. I just assumed it was Daredevil. So people knew who Matt Murdock was. At least one guy in Florida understood who Daredevil was through context.
Well, to Ethan's point, I think like 10 years from now, when we don't have generations that grew up with these movies and people are watching maybe just the Spider-Man trilogy as like an isolated trilogy, I think lines like that help give context and also open the door to like potential other stories without needing to really get into the weeds of, you know, everything that came before. But one thing I loved about this movie is what it systematically does to reset the status quo for Spider-Man throughout the movie.
Yeah,
we see Spider-Man. We get more exposed to Peter Parker's like smarts, like his intelligence, that we don't get as much in the previous two movies. He's way more of the naive, funny teenager who's kind of annoying everybody around him. This one, we get to see like, oh, I'm in a dimension with Doctor Strange. Oh, wait, I know geometry. I'm going to use geometry, you know, and in that type of problem solving, we get to see him use a Spider-Sense more. He's not relying on Stark armor for his like alerts and warnings.
Peter
like
Tingle.
He's using his Peter Tingle more. Like I know that like the Peter Tingle is a joke like in previous movies, but it felt like we didn't get to see it as much. We saw him use it. We saw him, you know, it was there, but it wasn't as pronounced as it was in this one, especially like that Green Goblin scene when like time sort of slows down and he's like, something is up. It's like,
that scene is not being talked about enough. It's the first time we get to see his Spidey-Sense really from his point of view. We get that really nice, like wide angle kind of drawback, and then we get to walk through the apartment with him, and we get to be in that spider moment with him. We've never seen that before. We've always been such an outsider. It's such a great moment that just ends up getting buried beneath 15,000 other really great moments.
Yeah. Well, and so we're also moving away from like the Stark armor. We're moving away from the Avengers completely with lines like that, where it's just like, oh yeah, and I'm a member of the Avengers, but I'm not right now. Like I'm Spider-Man right now. I'm Spider-Man with you guys right now. To give credit to the MCU, a lot of the stuff that they've adapted from the comic books, in my opinion, has been far superior. So when you talk about comic loyalists going to see these movies and talking about, oh, that's not accurate, that's not what happened in the comic books, like I'm in the boat that believes like these are completely separate. They can't be the same. Like, don't try to combine them. I'm also of the opinion that the storytellers in the MCU have like done it so well to just tell a better, more condensed story than what you're getting in the comic books.
Not even better, but it's just like, it's just different. And these fucking rule. I don't know. I'm not a comic book guy. You know what I mean? But for me, we have this conversation about the difference between books and movies all the time. But it's just like, these movies are objectively awesome. So just like, these are characters you love. Like, sorry you didn't get the exact thing you wanted. Like, do you know how insane it is that these movies exist at all? Like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, it is different. But one of the examples I wanted to bring up is that in like the Spider-Verse comic book, you have all these different iterations of Spider-Man. And for like the comic book reader, it's just cool to see that on the panel, see all these Spider-Men interacting together. But you never get the sense that, oh, this is what it would be like if a couple of Spider-Men were hanging out together. But this movie, I feel like perfectly conveys, it feels, as Ethan said, like it just feels natural. Like these dudes are on the scaffolding. They know their favorite spots around New York City. They've they can sort of relate. Like there's a lot of unspoken things that they already know about each other and that they can relate to. You know, Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland are like marveling at Tobey Maguire's internal web.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's hilarious. So I guess the thing that I wanted, all this to say that my elevator pitch would be in lieu of this sort of bringing Peter back to like more of a non MCU reliant status quo is seeing Peter do science in the lab, but also doing it with the other Peter Parkers. Like these nerds are just like working together and collaborating, and they're quipping, they're talking to each other. There's the conversation between Ned and Toby about the best friend, which is just so funny.
I love that.
And I just felt like that would be what I would show, just to say like, hey, this, like, Peter's back. Like Peter's back to his roots. The other thing I wanted to point out was that this movie also brings tragedy to Tom Holland finally, or any type of friction for being Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I said this to Ben and Tyler in our Slack channel after this movie came out. Like, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was about Tobey Maguire ruining his own life for being Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield's was about other people ruining his life for being Spider-Man. And up to this point, Tom Holland was just coasting. You know, he was an Avenger. He got to hang out with Tony Stark. He got to go into space. And being Spider-Man was a blast. Like, nothing wrong happened.
Yeah.
Until this movie, where now, like, by the end of this movie, like, where he's at, where he's like now had to grow up. He's not as like funny and annoying and like dorky as he was before. Like, now there's a new Peter, and that's what was cool. But Tom Holland, you know, did a fantastic job in this movie. He's a great Peter Parker. But we have on this here show, we have what is called the Apollonia Award, which essentially it's inspired by the character Apollonia in Purple Rain. It was coined by Tyler because we needed an award for someone who was not the protagonist, but who also in their way dominated the feature to the point where it feels like just as much their movie as it is the star of the movie. And so my question now is, who wins the Apollonia for this movie? And let's start off with Ethan.
This is a great question, especially coming off the heels of Sony basically doing a full FYC just like slam campaign for Spider-Man, going for Best Picture and all of these other things for the Oscars. Because apparently it's a very real conversation that we are having now. In a year of the Power of the Dog and all these other fantastic films. I want to. Willem Dafoe is hard not to mention in this conversation. He slips right back into being Green Goblin, being Norman Osborn. His ability to switch on and off is very eerie and very scary, and he doesn't miss a beat. We get a really good redemption arc with him and Toby, so I appreciate that. So it's hard not to give him a shout. I'm going to give a quick shout out to my boy Happy Hogan, Jon Favreau, the man who started it all. I think he is very, very good in this movie, even though he's in this movie for a very short amount of time. Considering he's in one of the last actual scenes is so emotional. Seeing what his character has been through, and I brought this up on my pod a while back, but he had a relationship with Tony the same way Peter did, just a little bit different, right? They were both best friends with Tony Stark. They've both had to deal with his loss and the trauma that they've suffered because of that. And I think you get to see a lot of that play out for Happy Hogan. But I think the winner of the award, I don't know if it pains me to say it, but I've just come to the reality. Andrew Garfield was the motherfucking star of this movie, and there's no other way around it. Two very particular scenes. The one that I mentioned earlier, when he's talking to Peter for the first time and just says, okay, you're right, like, I don't understand. And then when he rescues MJ, I think that he barely speaks, and to see his facial expressions, I think he is an incredible actor, well beyond the respect that people give him for. And I hope he wins something this year for Tick Tick Boom or something that he's done. But The fact that he saves MJ and he asks her, "Are you okay?" But MJ asks him back, "Are you okay?" And you see in his eyes the amount of relief that he gets from just that very small interaction with MJ. She has no clue what it means, but it erases years and years and years of trauma and guilt and everything that his Peter Parker has underwent and endured is relieved in that very single moment, and you can witness all of that come to fruition. And it is bananas how good he is in this movie. Yeah. And I gotta say, I'm on the train for making us Amazing Spider-Man 3. Let's do it. Let's go.
Well, dude, I've thought Garfield to me won this movie, which is fucking bonkers to say.
It's insane.
Like he straight up won. He stole the movie. And like I remember watching Amazing Spider-Man 2 when how do I not remember the character's name? Emma Stone plays her. It's not MJ. It's Gwen Stacy. That's right. When Gwen Stacy, when she falls and she dies, I remember thinking, I was like, holy shit. It's like, I can't believe they did this in a comic book movie. Like,
yeah,
I was like, these movies, I didn't feel like got enough credit for what, I understand that the execution maybe wasn't great, but what they were trying to do, like, I really appreciated. I was like, oh shit.
I remember rewatching that with my kids. I was like, oh crap.
Yeah, like that's a ballsy thing to do. And for that to pay off in this movie was like a little bit of like catharsis for everyone that watched those movies. Because I mean, I personally felt it. I was like, oh my God, thank God. Like he didn't have to go through that again. You know what I mean? It was bananas. But so I think Garfield is probably the real answer. Dafoe probably is like the 1A, 1B answer for this. You could argue that either of those guys won this movie, which is saying something considering how incredible Zendaya is. I thought Ned was really great in this movie. Obviously, the guy that, what is wrong with my memory?
Tom Holland.
Yeah, maybe it's this whiskey. I don't know. Tom Holland is great in the movie, but I'm going to have to throw it to Matt Murdock because like in a movie where we have all three versions of Spider-Man and all the villains and everything, the second we saw Matt Murdock on screen and we didn't see Daredevil, I was disappointed. And that's like, I'm not really disappointed, but I remember thinking the whole movie, I'm like, oh fuck, we never got Daredevil. Like, oh man, we saw Matt Murdock, who was teased, but we didn't like this entire movie that we loved so much. The world, like there's a million things you can nitpick. Like we could start nitpicking this thing to death, but like none of it matters because we got everything we wanted. And
that's true.
And we got everything we wanted and we were still surprised and still blown away by it. You know what I mean? Like, I almost feel like Feige could have been like, here's everything that's going to happen in this movie. And you're still going to go watch it and you're still going to love it. And he would have been right. Like, I don't know. It's just unbelievable.
This is a very weird side thing. That reminds me, there was one night back in the WCW, WWF days, Monday night, like when they would compete against each other.
Oh, yeah.
And the WCW was like, don't watch WWF tonight. Mankind's going to win the title. Stay here with us, blah, blah, blah. And then it ended up being like one of the highest WWF viewerships because like they saw Mankind was going to be like, oh, we want to see this happen. Like it kind of feels like that. Or you're like, yeah, Toby, Andrew Garfield's coming back. We're going to view like basically the Sinister Six. It's like, cool, we'll all still come. Like we all still want to see this.
Great.
Like,
I want to see that so bad.
Do you think Mankind will make a comeback?
Oh man.
If you follow Mick Foley on Instagram, he never left. He's very active.
It's true.
On social media.
Oh, shout out How To with John Wilson. It's like I just feel like I'm echoing basically my love for Andrew Garfield just like increased even more on this watch. But what I do want to just give a shout out to is realizing how lucky we got with our first two Raimi villains in Willem Dafoe and Alfred Molina, because those guys were just like, people talk about like, oh, Michael Caine played it straight in the Muppets Christmas Carol. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's why it works so well. And I feel that way with this too, because these guys weren't here to do like a comic book movie, so to speak, like they were taking their roles seriously to the right extent. And it was just so cool to see that again, to see like the unhinged Dafoe, like when he makes that switch. And we also see Molina make the switch the other way, and they were all great. And I'm glad Jamie Foxx got a little redemption because he was really arguably done the most wrong in all the web series.
Don't make me a murderer, Peter.
Was like his line, like when like everything's teleporting in and Ned's like looking at it, he's like, it's just a tree, man. Like it's just a tree.
It's a regular
like,
tree.
It's not a tree person or anything like that. Like he got some funny lines in here too, which was good. So yeah, Garfield for me takes the award. But we got so lucky with Willem Dafoe and Alfred Molina back then, and it was great to see them again.
Do you know how easy it would have been for them just to cash it in? For them just to say, give me a big old bag of money and I'll just show up for 10 minutes and I'll just cash it in. I'll phone it in and I won't actually do anything. Willem Dafoe went entirely the other way and probably did it better than he did it nearly 20 years ago, which is absurd.
He was horrifying.
Yeah.
So scary.
He's the scariest MCU villain in my opinion so far.
Yeah.
So,
I like that. Nuts. I like that.
Well, that was what I was about to say is like, do you think it upsets our boy Feige knowing that like the best possible villain in the MCU belongs to Sony? like we've like no shots to Mysterio or any other, like no shots to Thanos or whoever, but like Willem Dafoe in his, 45 minutes of screen time in a movie that like he was only brought into for literal fan service is a better villain than anything we've got in the entire MCU run. Like we've had some cool villains. Like there's a villain problem in the MCU. Like,
yeah, I was just going to say that.
I think in Marvel in general, I think Spider-Man, I think it's well known that Spider-Man has like the best villains in Marvel outside of like Magneto or whatever. But like, it must be so irksome to know that like, God damn it, like we have the best villain we've got, we have to give back to Sony, and he, now he's gone. I don't know.
Yeah, and for me, like, if I'm to give the Apollonia Award, it pains me not to give to Willem Dafoe because seriously, like, oh man, when Peter's fighting him in the hall and he's punching him and he's just like
so
smiling.
brutal, man.
So that was like Joker interrogation room shit. Oh man.
And then in the Aunt May scene, and then again when they're fighting on the Statue of Liberty, just like some of the like his facial, his performance just overall, like, geez.
Talk about his ability as a villain too, to go to two different worlds and get each Spider-Man in each world to feel the same way about him. Like to go and wreak havoc against Tobey Maguire and cause all of these problems, and then to come over to Tom Holland's universe and cause the same problems to where Tom Holland wants to take his own hovercraft and stab him with it is unbelievable villainry. Like that's just like top notch, just like the worst possible villain you could ever be.
Well, because it just shows like how clever and adaptable he is. He just got pulled into a new universe, a new dimension, and like he's like, okay, cool, I know how to manipulate this. I'm gonna go fucking find Spider-Man. Like I know exactly what to do.
I almost killed my Spider-Man's loved ones. I'm gonna kill this Spider-Man's loved ones.
Pretty incredible stuff.
But just to add my voice to the chorus of Andrew Garfield fans, so I was shocked at how much I enjoyed The Amazing Spider-Man when I rewatched them before watching this movie. The Amazing Spider-Man 2, like we've already talked about, has its flaws. It's not a great movie. They threw in some weird music for it. I'll never understand the Philip Phillips music while he's like putting together like the map on the wall. It's like, this doesn't make sense. But it has like the best moments of that trilogy. It's not the better movie, but it has some of the most important and the best moments.
Yeah.
And I really loved him in that. And I loved, as everyone said, like seeing his arc evolve in this one. Like I went in, I after watching the Amazing Spider-Man movies, I wanted more Andrew Garfield. This movie gave me more Andrew Garfield, but now I need more Andrew Garfield.
Yes.
Yep.
And so it like there's this fantasy in my head where it's like, okay, they brought back Andrew Garfield. Everybody loves him. So what are they going to do? Sony is going to continue their movies with Andrew Garfield as their Spider-Man. Marvel's going to continue with Tom Holland as their Spider-Man. And then people can just accept both of them because we've already seen them together.
And it's so beautiful. Exactly. Like, it's just,
I don't know if they'll do that. A part of me hopes that, today it was announced that Morbius is delayed. It's like, wait a second here. are they going to throw in Andrew Garfield? Like, are they
totally
was it done?
should.
And they're throwing in Andrew. I don't know.
Like, this movie hit the reset button for not only the MCU Spider-Man, but just Spider-Man in general. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like maybe I'm overthinking it, but it's just like now, like, everything's on the table because now everyone has what they want. Everyone gets what they want. Everyone can be happy now. Now they can keep doing, like, they can bring back Webb to direct Amazing Spider-Man 3. My air conditioner's going crazy on me over here. And like, it doesn't matter. Those movies could suck and it doesn't matter. It's just like the reset button's been hit. If you don't like it, like, you still have this other Spider-Man over here. Like, they could sell Spider-Man to 15 different studios and they could each have their own run at it and it wouldn't matter. Everyone could have their own thing. I don't know. It's just,
well, and the other thing that they cured, and we've talked about this a little bit outside of the podcast, but before, so they rebooted Spider-Man way too early. None of us were over Tobey Maguire in that cast. Yeah. None of us were over Sam Raimi. Mm-hmm. It was way too soon. And that's part of, I think, why people sort of didn't have a great taste about Andrew Garfield in those movies, even though they were like cool and we like Spider-Man, but it's like no one was ready for it. But when you bring in a multiverse and you realize, oh, wait a second, I don't have to rank these guys. Right. I don't have to have one replace the other. I can have all of them.
Right.
It all of a sudden, like, Andrew Garfield doesn't seem so bad anymore. And then you see this movie, it's like, Andrew Garfield's my favorite Spider-Man. And yeah, you know, it just works. So now for our final segment, the way we finish off every episode, we have our Rushmore Mountain. And I never believed we'd be in a world where we could actually do a Rushmore of Spider-Man movies.
Yeah.
or movies that have Spider. So I guess the category is movies with Spider-Man in them. And I can't believe there are more than 4.
Yeah.
I believe, are there 11 movies with
8
Spider-Man?
Spider-Mans. Yeah. 11. Yep.
I think so.
So
got a lot of
so
choices.
we have 11 to choose from. I'm interested to hear your guys' picks.
These are OR scrubs. Oh, are they?
Let's kick it off with Tyler.
Oh, I couldn't be a worse person to pick to go first here because
that's why we picked you.
I don't have a list put together.
We're doing
so
it live.
what I'm gonna do is my list mirrors Ben's exactly.
Okay.
So I'll
go
throw
for
to
the
Ben.
solid
Clone Saga.
And to be
the
honest,
Clone Saga.
Like I'm looking through here, like the movies that Ben picked are actually the movies that I would pick. I think this is the first time this has happened in the pod.
Yeah.
Where we had like full crossover.
This is a historic episode.
Because in all reality, my answer to this is like, you could show me any of the Spider-Man properties and I'll be happy. I liked all of them. I liked the web ones. Like, I understood why some people didn't like them, but I think Andrew Garfield, you know, is my favorite Spider-Man, regardless of who's the better Parker, who's the better whatever. Like, he was my favorite to watch as Spider-Man. Tom Holland is right up there with him, but just like, I don't know. I love the Garfield Spider-Man. I love those movies and I loved all the Raimis. So whatever, just I'll watch any of them. So, but Ben's list mirrors mine the most if I had to pick an actual 4. So we'll take it from here.
I think it shows that we have the best list. So that's great.
That's right.
Okay.
So these ones I picked because they were just the ones that like I remember the most distinctly and like how they had an effect on me. I mean, we've all said it on here, so I won't go into it anymore, but Spider-Man 2, one of the best superhero movies of all time. That one definitely would make my list. Civil War, I've mentioned tearing up on here. Like when I saw the Queen's like text pop up and all that, I was like, oh my God, like that was my version of that guy saying no fucking way, where I was just like, oh my God, like this is happening. Like it blew my mind. It was like, sitting. We were next to each other, Matt, right? When we saw Civil War. Like, I was just like, oh my God, like I don't know like who else I could be seeing this with. Like this is perfect. Spider-Verse, as people have talked about on here. I walked out of that movie and asked my girlfriend declared, I guess, like, I think I just saw the best Spider-Man movie ever, which is crazy because Spider-Man 2 still is just like reigns supreme for me. But this, like, Into the Spider-Verse, if you haven't checked it out, it's just so great what they did with it. I can't wait for, is it Across the Spider-Verse? Is that our next one that we're getting right?
Part 1, baby. Part one.
It's going to be so good. And then it's hard for me not to have the nostalgia factor and put No Way Home in there. Ethan, I talked about that on your pod. Like, I just gave it 5 stars immediately. There's no way for me to be like objective about this movie. Like, it just hit every single nostalgia bone in my body. It was perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. I love what they did, where they let the Spider-Man like be emotional. And like, we had 3 guys just having a conversation about their feelings for multiple parts of this movie. Like, that doesn't ever happen in movies, like at all, let alone superhero movies. So it's so good. And that's what would cap off my Spidey Rushmore Mountain.
Yeah, I'm obviously picking some of the same. I think No Way Home for the very same reasons. It's the culmination of so many years of Spider-Man, and riding that high, I think, is something that I definitely wish I could go back and see for the first time. And a very specific reason I haven't seen it for a third time yet is because I want to replicate that first time, and I know I won't be able to. So I'm trying to figure out, when am I going to be in the best headspace to deal with this again, to see it again. So that definitely makes the cut. Spider-Man 2, same reasons you said, Ben. I think it's nearly timeless. I think it is one of the best Spider-Man movies, one of the best comic book movies out there, and is huge just for comic book movies in general. And that fight on the train is still not replicated. I don't know if we'll ever get another scene like that. And Toby stopping the train and New Yorkers saying they have his back. I think just like the entirety of that kind of final act is so big for that movie.
He's just a kid. Like, yeah.
Wild stuff. Spider-Verse for sure is my third pick, because I think regardless of how much I like No Way Home and Spider-Man 2, I think Spider-Verse is the single best Spider-Man movie when it comes to timelessness, when it comes to the ability to be unique, to tell a fascinating and a moving story. That's our first representation of like a mixed race family. You've got Miles Morales. You got this brand new style of animation that we've never seen before. You've got so many cool things at play, and that is the single Spider-Man movie you can turn on literally anytime and not need any previous information. You don't need to kind of like prepare yourself for anything crazy. I think it's just a really, really good time, and for that purpose is the single best one. And then my fourth pick is going to be Infinity War, actually. Avengers Infinity War. Spider-Man plays a huge role in this movie. The iconic I Don't Feel So Good, Mr. Stark. Like, all of this is such a pivotal movie, such a pivotal film in Peter Parker's character arc outside of his trilogy that we get so far. And I think that you can't fully understand the relationship that Peter Parker had with Tony Stark, or who he has become, or the trauma that he suffered without experiencing Infinity War. And, one of the few movies that I totally remember exactly what I felt at the very end of it. And you're just like, what the fuck? Like, they lost. They lost, and now we have to wait. And Spider-Man just dissolved. Like, what are we doing? And that much emotion packed in a single film is huge for Spider-Man.
Yeah, I remember texting Ben immediately after Infinity War, like, Ben, you have to explain some things to me. What is happening? And I remember thinking, like, this was when, like, you have, like, I started thinking about, like, the economy of the actor or whatever. I was just like, okay, there's no way they killed Spider-Man. There's no way they did it. But also, like, I wasn't sure. And, like, there was a lot of characters that disappeared, and I was just like, there's no way they did it. But, like, I don't know, man. Maybe there's contracts up. They don't want to do this shit anymore. Like, maybe Black Panther's dead. I don't know. But Infinity War, and you're absolutely right. Like, the Tony and Spider-Man relationship is pivotal.
And it's really tested in Infinity War too, when he secretly goes to space with Tony, and you get that whole interaction with them. You get to see not just what you get to see in Homecoming of Peter like wanting to be like Tony, but he pushes on Tony and he tries to be involved in things that he's not supposed to. And Tony is not a terrible mentor, but he's a mentor with his own demons, right? And understanding both sides of that and who Peter has now grown into because he sees Tony's face everywhere he goes, because he misses his friends so much, because the single Avenger that questioned everything he did never questioned who to give Edith to. He knew in his heart, at his core, it was always going to be Peter Parker, and they have such a special bond. And we could dive into all of that storyline that is covered in this trilogy, and it's huge. I think it's one of the best, most emotionally attaching storylines in the MCU, if not the single best. I think you can't leave it off the list. And
one of my favorite MCU lines of all time. He's like, I'm Peter Parker. I'm Doctor Strange. Like, we're using our made up names.
Yeah.
Like, just one of the best superhero lines ever.
So good.
I love that so much.
I'm Peter, by the way.
Doctor Strange.
Oh, you're using your made up names. I'm Spider-Man then.
So, I mean, we've talked about Spider-Man 2 again and again. What's funny about Spider-Man 2 is I feel like it was no secret that Sony and Columbia were using the Spider-Man movies as a platform to promote their music. Mm-hmm. And so Spider-Man 2, in addition to being like a really awesome movie and nostalgic for the time, also like attached like their soundtrack was really awesome, especially for the time. And then they sort of tried to do it with Amazing Spider-Man 2 with much less good results, with much worse results. Mm-hmm. But I felt like they sort of found their way again with Spider-Verse. That Sunflower Jam by Post Malone was like perfect for that movie.
And What's
like,
Up Danger
awesome.
Is so iconic when he jumps off the building is so like, that's my wallpaper on my phone. It's never, ever, ever going to change. No matter how much I love my kids, I'm sorry, but that's the picture, man.
Do something better. I don't know what to tell you.
Be better.
So, I mean, Spider-Man 2, it's my number one. Spider-Verse number 2. Then it's hard to have a Spider-Man movie list without No Way Home on it going forward. I think it's impossible. And then I have to go back to the cinematic roots of just the first Spider-Man, Sam Raimi.
Yeah, I like that.
But yeah, I mean, is there anything else anyone wants to cover on this movie?
I can't imagine what we haven't talked about, but there's also like a lot I'm sure that we haven't talked about. But yeah,
if there's something we didn't cover, leave it in the comments. We will tackle it next time Spider-Man is mentioned. Maybe we'll address it somehow.
Yeah,
leave it in the comments. We'll address it and let us know what we forgot to talk about. But I just want to thank Ethan for coming back to chat this with us.
Yes, sir.
Love having you on. Love talking about Spider-Man. Before we leave, will you let everyone know again, just a reminder where they can find you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I could literally talk about Spider-Man, every single day of the week. So this is a dream. Find me at 15 Minute Marvel on Twitter, 15 Minutes of Marvel on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. There's new episodes every Wednesday and Friday, covering the latest in MCU, Marvel rumors, news, reviews, everything like that in as close to 15 minutes as I can do it. Sometimes I go over, but it's the MCU, so what are you going to do?
Don't you have another podcast too?
Oh my God, Ben, do we have another podcast?
I believe that we do. We have an extended 15 minutes. We've extended to 24 minutes of A24, where we talk about all the A24 movies. And I think we might be starting to dip into some of the A24 TV shows in the future with Euphoria season 2 coming out,
Yeah, baby.
We'll see. Wow. But yeah, anything A24 we talk about in never 24 minutes.
Exactly.
Has yet to be 24 minutes.
You've got a lot of great content for many of us to consume here. But thanks once again for joining us for this big little pod covering Spider-Man No Way Home. Go check it out if you haven't already. If you have, check it out again. But tell us what you think, and we'll catch you next time.
# Maggie for Mysterio.
Get out of here.
The Maggie cut. Release the Maggie cut.
The Maggie cut.
Release the Maggie cut.
You could ask a question to a philosopher.
Do you think mankind is going to make a comeback?
I hope so. If we can survive the perils of climate change, inequality, and the fantastic weapons of destruction we've created for ourselves.
But that same question might get a much different answer at WrestleMania.
Do you think mankind is going to make a comeback?
No, not tonight. He fell off too many Hell in the Cells.